Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
It's a great pleasure to have a chance to talk to James Mirrlees about his life and work. James, when and where were you born?
Minnegaff in southern Scotland, southwest Scotland, which is a village in one shire, but it's a suburb of a town in another shire.
And when?
1936, July 1936.
July, so this is your birthday year.
Yes, quite
Your
true.
birthday month. Yeah.
Yep.
Good. Well, happy birthday, whether it's been or going to be.
Yes.
And the Scots have an interest in their ancestry. Go back at least to your grandparents and tell me something about them and their character and anything you know about them. That would be interesting to hear.
My father's father, I was very proud of having gone to work at 7 and retired at 70. Clearly enjoying the jingle. He would have gone obviously to some unskilled employment, but he became what was called an analytical chemist in the dye works. He must have done a certain amount of preparation. And he was a real paterfamilias.
This is your grandfather?
That's right.
Yes. By that you mean he was quite a formidable authoritarian character.
Took it for granted that people would do things for him, but he seemed, as far as I remember, quite nice. He was a lot older than me, because he was probably quite a bit older than my father. Fathers tend to be older than sons, I mean.
Yes.
So my father was born in 1900, and he must have been born at least 40, maybe 45 years before that. But I do remember him in the war, so he must have, and he didn't quite make 90, but he made a decent age.
What about your grandmother?
I never met her.
You
She
didn't
was
meet
dead
her.
before.
And on the other side?
And that's my mother. My mother's father was the local electrician in a little town called Boxburn, near Edinburgh. By that I mean he was in charge of the power station. In these days the electricity was generated in the village. And my mother's mother, I remember her as a very nice character, very small lady. And I don't suppose she ever had any profession. I never heard her talk about it. But she cooked lots of cakes. She did the right sorts of things that Scottish mothers are supposed to do.
What about your parents?
My father was a banker. He would have left school. He had to leave school at 13, I believe, because the family needed the money. He went to work in a torpedo factory just before the First World War began. And at some stage he moved into a bank. And you know, at least in Scotland, that if you're a banker, you do exams on the job. So you work away. I don't know whether that's true now, but my brother left school at 15, I think. Anyway, the first stage you could, and went into the bank. And then did the evening work and moved up to be a vice president of the Royal Bank of Canada. So it doesn't stop you going quite far in banking.
What sort of person was your father, apart from being a banker?
Very cheerful, full of stories that one heard so often, the usual problem. But yeah, he was
You were
nice,
fond of him.
Yes.
He was supportive of you.
Oh yes. I think that's fair. I do remember a point, a was clearly something that was worrying him. He said, I'm not sure that we can actually afford to send you to university.
Mm.
But, Scotland had rather a low grant level from the local authority. I'm sure that they would have done.
Mm.
So perhaps he was just encouraging me to get some scholarships.
Mm.
Which I did.
Well, we'll come to that later and find out
Well,
what you did. What about your mother? What was she like?
Because the hesitation
That's what the beauty of film is, you see. The hesitation means something.
yes.
Um,
So I don't know that we ever got on terribly well.
mm.
At times.
Was she very
suppose I
ambitious?
was growing up at I would have been a teenager, a young teenager at just the time when it can be difficult for some women. I think it was for her.
Was she ambitious for you or not?
I don't think so particularly. They certainly wanted me to get a well-paid job.
Mm.
They were very sceptical about my academic ambitions.
Mm.
Indeed, they thought it was a great mistake.
You had a brother and other siblings, or
Yes, just one brother.
just one brother? Right. Well, tell me about your sort of any first memories, or particularly your first school. That comes as an early memory that might indicate why you became a great economist, perhaps, or not.
Yeah, the memories that come to mind are in some ways a bit embarrassing. I remember on one occasion a teacher had been telling us about the Arctic and the Antarctic. And she had the Arctic in the south and the Antarctic in the north. I don't remember the details. I remember standing up and saying, "Miss, you have it upside down," which I think was very rude.
Did she know that? I thought it was very rude too.
Yes, I wasn't punished. So she was obviously quite a nice person.
Hmm.
And I do remember being able to do arithmetic very quickly.
Do you? At what age?
I must be thinking around age 10. Might have been earlier.
Hmm.
But I remember that the teacher was inclined to mental arithmetic was a big thing
Hmm.
as part of the exam in order to get into the high school.
Hmm.
But she was throwing out some probably increasingly difficult problems.
Hmm.
And then she'd asked me to explain how it was that I always knew the answer straight away. And I remember actually doing it and being extremely puzzled. But of course I can't remember what I said.
So you didn't know how you did it, but you just knew.
No, the interesting thing is I clearly did know how I did it.
Hmm.
But it was things like going to numbers nearby and that made the sum easy and doing the corrections. There was nothing terribly clever about it really.
Hmm.
But it involved seeing patterns, so it's clear that I could see patterns in numbers at a fairly early age. Other things I remember, so the early years was when there were evacuees from, in our case, London, to avoid the Blitz in London. And it's interesting looking back that they seemed to be better than us. They separate prizes for the evacuees and the local children.
Really?
Because the local children weren't going to get any prizes. But that's how I remember it, whether rightly or wrongly. Sadly, I've totally lost touch with anyone I was at school with primary, or indeed now secondary level. I'm sure I can't remember any of the names. I know that's very different from, say, my wife, or my late wife either, who certainly had a lot of connections. That may be an interesting piece of psychology.
What about your secondary school? Where did you go to secondary school?
Well, in the town, in Newton Stewart, which is this small town that Milligaff was the suburb of, and it had the high school for that half of Wigtonshire. How many? When I first went throughout, I suppose it was a selective school. Secondary, called the high school, Devonshire High School. And classes were streamed. I think there were 2 levels, A and B. So that shows that it was pretty small. Must have been an annual intake of about 60, 50 or 60. What is there to say about it? I enjoyed my time there.
Were you good at or interested in games at all?
No.
Yeah. Not at all.
Interested. For some reason, I got interested in tennis and cricket. I like the summer games. I think there's an obvious reason, actually. You can't play football with glasses. And my eyesight was pretty poor. If I wasn't wearing glasses, I couldn't see the ball.
Really? Are you short-sighted?
Well, I've now had the benefit of cataract and have artificial lenses inserted.
But you were, as a child,
so
you
I
were
was
short-sighted.
short-sighted from early on.
That's interesting.
I presume because I read a great deal. Same
Yeah.
reason the Japanese and increasingly the Chinese.
Yes, I'll tell you.
Short-sighted.
We'll discuss that maybe afterwards. I have theories about it. But that's interesting. So the sports of the summer were nice. What
Probably,
about,
you also asked if I was interested in sport. Probably I'd have been more interested if I was better at it. Because I'm afraid I left an implication that I might have been good at tennis and cricket, which I certainly wasn't.
I associate Scotland, among other things, with fishing, because my father was a keen fisherman. We used to go fishing in Scotland. Did you have that or any other hobbies that you were particularly keen on?
I've never caught a fish in my life, but I have been out on a rowing boat in Scottish lochs. They've tried, but they don't seem to like whatever I put on the line. So I gave up fishing at an early stage. My grandfather was a very keen fisherman, but there were no rods in the house or anything like that. And it might have been, maybe we were just a little bit far from good fishing rivers where we were living.
What about other hobbies?
Well, piano was the main one.
Was it?
Not that I started that till I was about 12 or 13.
Do you play now?
Yes,
You do.
I haven't given up. I keep trying.
Mm.
I'll get there.
Well, that takes us on to the important matter of music. I mean, has music been important in your life?
Yes. Of course, I mean particularly in the enjoyment. Yes. Enjoyment seems a sort of inadequate word. I look back, I particularly enjoyed playing music. And in the time in Cambridge, I was able to play quite a bit of chamber music because I had friends who played violin and cello. And we had a very good time. One of the great advantages of Cambridge is the size of the rooms that you get. You can actually rent a piano and there's room for other people to come in and play. What this does to others, economists talk about external diseconomies, the trouble you cause by enjoying yourself.
Well,
I'm afraid this might have had a serious impact.
Well, there are often 2 or 3 doors between you and elsewhere as here, so maybe it's built for such diseconomies. But what kind of music, you said to listen, you liked, what kind of music do you particularly listen to?
I remember starting the piano, at least my parents suggested it, and I said yes, so I'd like to be able to play popular songs. I'm curious to know why very quickly. the kind of music you start with when you're learning piano, which is not really very enjoyable to listen to, but I took to it very quickly and decided classical music was what I wanted. But within classical music, I would say pretty Catholic taste. I've never been in a choir, so I don't listen to choral music all that much, although I greatly admire it. I think Tovey said that vocal music was the best.
Who said this?
Donald Tovey.
Oh yes.
And I can sort of see that. And when it comes to leader, I'm always prepared to say yes, that's the best.
But
I never got into that. So I'm much more involved with music of Bach and later.
Bach and later.
And that's quite a lot by now.
Yes, there's lots.
There's still a lot more to hear. Though interestingly, I think that probably true that you can not only hear all of the really good music written in that period in your life, but you can hear them often enough to pretty much get to know them. That's not going to be true in a few centuries if composers start composing more music.
Especially with computers, they can compose an awful lot. In what way do you listen to music? I mean, do you listen just to relax, or do you, some people find it inspiring in some way, they listen and it seems to feed in some way into their intellectual work as well. Or they have ideas when they're listening.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether I do. Of course, I like going to concerts. And, the big point of concerts, besides the sense that you're listening with others, is that you really concentrate. I do find that at home, and I always regret it, that I'm inclined to pick up something to look at while I'm listening to music, even if I've set about putting it on to concentrate. I don't recollect thinking that I got stimulated by that. But quite often when I'm getting stuck, the kind of economics I do involves thinking about problems and often doing stuff like mathematics and so on. And that's the kind of intellectual activity where you frequently get stuck, at least I do. And it seems to me that then going and playing the piano is helpful. And it may be that doing almost anything else would be equally helpful. But that's the particular thing I feel inclined to do when I'm stuck.
Well, just anecdotally, as you know, well, you may not know, but there's a wonderful concert going on in your college this evening. Two of my favourite things, James Bowman and Handel. So,
well, then Handel is something.
You're a Handel fan?
I'm a fan of Handel.
Yes, so am I. So,
but I didn't.
The great countertenor singing Handel.
Yes.
And Purcell was in Trinity College Chapel. What more could you ask of an evening? So that's something to look forward to. The other thing that I associate with Scotland as well as fishing is Calvinism, or at least religion. Several of my ancestors there were quite, well, in fact there were a lot of them were ministers on the islands, Barra and Gia and so on and so on. And so that perhaps naturally leads into the question of something that also often happens at school, which is that either one becomes confirmed and goes through a phase of particular interest in religion, or one begins to question it, or both. Well, firstly, were your parents interested or involved in religion?
Well, my father was a church elder. Sure, my mother had little interest in it, and I don't think she ever went to church after Dad died. Indeed, I don't think we went to church that much in later years. I do remember him getting worked up about religious issues, but this was the great fraught question, whether you should have separate cups for communion wine or a single cup, which tearing the congregation apart at some stage in my youth. I take that to be a signal that in a sense, religion is not very important to him. But he cared about that. That's clear. But he cared about it entirely on health grounds, and not on theological. I suppose took religion, Christianity, Church of Scotland Christianity very much for granted through my youth. Was confirmed, or whatever we called it in the Church of Scotland. But I didn't do very much. I would have gone to church most Sundays, I think. And I do remember that I listened to the sermons. Then, at some stage at university in Edinburgh, I got drawn into the student Christian movement and paid a bit more attention to it. But certainly, if asked, I would have said, well, yes, I'm a Christian. Not Christian. But it wouldn't have taken much of my time. Looking back on it, I really don't understand, because now my view is that it's all nonsense.
All nonsense.
Maybe a bit
Say it
extreme,
loudly.
but there you are. It does seem to me an intriguing question, how these beliefs and practices have arisen. I'm sure that there's something very important there, but it's certainly not something that appeals to me. I'm quite contrary. But when I was in Cambridge, I was a member of the Student Christian Movement, and indeed I was president for, no,
Not KQ.
not KQ, Student Christian Movement, which is the liberal side, I think you might call it, part of the ecumenical movement. I would never have thought that being born again or anything like that would be utterly disreputable. So I certainly wasn't of that persuasion.
And if you were president of the Student Christian Union, there must have been
Christian movement.
movement.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes.
Movement. Did it just fade away, or was there a sort of particular point at which you decided that this was all nonsense?
No, it went on for a while, and I think it would have been about 3 years into Oxford in the 1970s. But decided didn't at all understand why I thought that there was a case.
The head of your college, Martin Rees, is often quoted. People seem to approve his formula, which I think he may have repeated in the interview I did with him, which is that he's a non-believing Christian. Also seemed to be the view roughly of Don Cupid, who I've also interviewed. Basically, they like the ritual and the forms and the history and the associations. It's just the actual dogma which is intolerable, or at least wrong, or irrelevant, or misguided, or something. Do you have that sort of view, that in other words you wouldn't object to going to chapel if an elderly colleague of yours had died, or even joining in a service, but you just don't believe any of it is helpful?
Yes, that's right. Yes, I don't believe any of it, and I don't believe it. Well, it would be wrong to say I don't believe it's helpful, because there are clearly people who are
Helped by
by
it.
it. And of course, I have no objection to listening to Grace or going to chapel to listen to good music. yes, I actually do think there is something helpful or right about the ceremonials, the sacred memorial services, funerals. I don't think we need to have mentions of God, but I'm not going to complain if that's the language that's used.
Yes. Right, well, let's just finish the school. Were there any subjects which you were really particularly enthusiastic and taking to by the end of your time at school? Or you mentioned maths. Were you doing...
That maths was dominant, certainly. But otherwise, I dare say I enjoyed most subjects. With it being Scotland, of course, you do a whole range of subjects right through. We didn't do much history, and that gets pushed on the sidelines. And of course, I later discovered that history gets interesting after the point at which you do the little bits of cramming, remembering dates and places for what's called lower history in Scotland. Latin didn't appeal much. I seemed to manage it all right.
How did... I mean, I'm not sure whether you went somewhere else before, but you obviously ended up in Cambridge. How was that, and how did you get the money to go to university?
Yep. It's a kind of complicated story. Let's do it very briefly because it's not of great interest in a way. Although I have noticed when reading some of the Nobel autobiographies that others have written, that there are often interesting obstacles in people's way, some accidents that happen that throw them completely off track. What had happened was that the school inspector had come to the school and noticed that I had got rather good marks in maths papers a year early, said I should go to Cambridge. And the school said that they sort of heard of Cambridge, but didn't quite know what you did in order to get to Cambridge. And they learned that in these days, although an English girl or boy could get a grant from a local authority to go to a Scottish university, a Scottish young boy could not do the same and go to England. The grant was smaller in Scotland, but it wasn't that you could take the smaller grant and go to Cambridge. You just couldn't go. They wouldn't give you a grant at all. With one exception, which was that if you got a scholarship, an open scholarship, Cambridge scholarship, as they were in these days, there were entry scholarships, that you'd get supplementation from the Department of Education in Edinburgh, as it was called, so not your local county. Special arrangement. And that's what the inspector was after. So in other words, I had to take the scholarship exam. I don't know if you went through this great trial.
I took an attempted scholarship at Oxford, yes.
Right. Now, math scholarship exam, I know in retrospect is quite strange. Normally, as I understand it, people will be taught by those who got to know that exam very well over a long period of time. And in my school, nobody had ever heard of the Cambridge Scholarship exam. So we put me in for it and got a hold of exam papers by writing away to bookshops. And then I settled down to try to solve problems in the exam paper, which are at a level well beyond what you do for Scottish school exams, at least did in these days. And my maths teacher, awfully nice chap, called Macfarlane, long dead, I'm afraid.
What was his name?
Macfarlane.
Macfarlane. Oh, right.
And he'd been enormously helpful.
Mm.
He was helping me along, lending me his maths books and things like this.
Mm.
But we got busy, and it was a competition between the two of us to solve these problems, which I'm happy to say I managed better than he did. But there were some occasions it took us a day or something or more to do it. Now there was one key fact we were not aware of. We thought when you've got a paper with 10 questions in it, you're supposed to answer them. And so we were working at trying to enable me to, in 3 hours, answer 10 scholarship questions. And I believe that was not what was expected. So if people got 2 or 3 done, that was going to scholarship, if I understand it right. I got to that point. It would have been fine. But a week before the exam, I got a burst appendix and got rushed off to hospital in Glasgow. That was that. So that's why I went to Edinburgh instead. 3 years later, I took the scholarship exam. There were actually 2 of us from Edinburgh who took it that year. Keith Moffat took it. I was director of the Newton Institute on Point, contemporaries. And of course, at that point, it was a double for us to take the exam, and we got scholarships. I think I heard that Trinity decided enough of this nonsense. They weren't going to keep having people come down and do another undergraduate degree.
You'd already done one undergraduate degree.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm rather happy with the fact that I started with an MA and then I went on to get a BA. Because in Scotland, they're MAs. As a 4-year, supposedly a 4-year course. I did it in 3. All of this could have been a great waste of time. But I don't think it was, partly because, very oddly, I escaped national service. Because just at the point when I was going to Cambridge, the government said we've got a terrible shortage of mathematics. So people who graduate with firsts in mathematics and who are going to go on using the mathematics don't have to do national service yet. And the Trinity had insisted everybody did national service before they came out. So they said, oh, well, in this case, you can come straight away. So I was coeval with people coming in straight from school, accepted by national service. That was probably a good thing. That worked quite well.
I was imagining you came straight to Cambridge and was going to ask you whether you can remember your first impressions of coming here from some small Scottish town, but obviously you come from Edinburgh, so it wasn't such a big shock or anything. But do you remember coming to Cambridge and how it struck you then?
Well, it was a bit of a shock. I came down to do the scholarship exam, and you get put up for the week or the few days in college. There was in this palatial room with a separate bedroom. This was quite different from what I had in Edinburgh. So that certainly impressed me. That building was pretty good, but quite good in Edinburgh. That wasn't it so much. And then when I arrived, another occasion when I was ill, I flew, and so I got in a week late. Which I suppose must have been a bit disturbing. You don't quite get in on the usual introductory things. So yes, it was a bit confusing at first. But very quickly I was tremendously impressed by the sense that people were teaching at a different intellectual level from Edinburgh. saying that they couldn't have done it in Edinburgh, but somehow the tradition was there that you wouldn't do the really abstract mathematics. In the first year at Cambridge, they were doing things at the level of abstraction that was not done in the undergraduate degree in Edinburgh at all. And it was partly associated with the sheer intellectual quality of the teachers. But that, I think I became quite sensitive early on to people being very clever and enjoy that. So that's what's so nice about Cambridge. Just a lot of people who are very bright and very hard to keep up with.
Were there any particularly bright and hard to keep up with teachers which you remember from that period in Cambridge? Trinity's famous for its mathematicians, among other ones.
Yes. Oh, well. So the people who taught me in that first year, and actually I had only 1 year of supervision at that stage, although when I moved to economics, it was actually done by supervisions on an informal basis. But then Michael Tia taught us for a term or two, and John Polkinghorn teaching.
And who I've interviewed, yes.
Peters van Dyer. I've forgotten whether he was actually teaching or it's just that I got to know him. Castles. Pretty good.
Pretty good, yes. But you just did 1 year and then you changed to economics?
No, I did 2 years, but the second year was part 3
Oh, right.
Tritus, which didn't in these days involve any supervision at all.
Oh, right.
Just meant going to very hard courses and struggling away. That's it. I did all right.
You did all right.
And I probably didn't spend as much time on mathematics as I should have. So it's generally believed you can't spend an awful lot of time on mathematics. People vary greatly.
What else were you doing? I mean, were you involved in?
Well, there was this student Christian movement that I was presiding over, which involved quite a lot of time.
You were doing
And
public
then I went to
speaking?
all kinds of...
Were you in the union?
No, but I belonged to a lot of clubs. So I went along to, I remember Sunday evening sessions of a little think tank group in the Labour Club.
You weren't an apostle. You're allowed to say.
Yes.
I've interviewed several apostles and they've told me, so if you were, you can tell me. But
Yes, but not at that point.
no, you were later.
Okay, well, it was while I was in economics that I got ushered into that.
So after 2 years of this, you then changed into economics? Or?
Yeah. So in that second year of mathematics, I still don't know exactly why things happened that way. But I'm sure mathematics was beginning to become hard, which it hadn't been up to that point. Also, definitely getting bored with it, and was questioning what it's for, really. Associated with particularly SCM kind of Christianity was social conscience. And that was quite strong, and I wanted to do something useful. I was actually finding it rather hard to imagine quite what I would do that would be good. Although I did get as far as applying to go on and do a PhD in maths. But just in that last term I decided, no, it's a mistake, and I'd like to do social science. One of the many societies I was involved with was the Sociology Society.
Okay.
At that time, sociology didn't exist.
No.
This is opposition for you anthropologists. But certainly, I don't remember us seeing any anthropologists in meetings of the society. And just for a week or two, I think I seriously played with the idea. I think sociology was just going to come in as a subject. Peter Swinnerton Dyer sent me along to see Pierre Straffa,
Mm.
one of the more famous Trinity economists. So he'll explain to you that economics is the subject. And I remember that Joan Robertson turned up partway through that meeting. This was the first time I met her.
Mm.
I honestly can't recollect that they said anything that persuaded me that economics was right, but I had been curious about economics for a while, so I think I was quite easily nudged into it. But I was curious. One reason was that I thought it had to do with curing poverty, and that's a very strong motivation for getting into it. But the other was, I think, just this sheer puzzlement that it's in a way quite a famous subject, and I couldn't make head or tail of it from talking to economics students. Any other subject I could pretty much find out about it by talking to them. Somehow it's obvious what history is about. I don't know, physics, chemistry, school, literary subjects, all of these. So for some reason, economics was the most mysterious and puzzling. I could almost say it was the only subject I didn't understand. But obviously,
And the rest of your
full
life has
understand.
been trying to understand it.
And that's right, still at it.
So who were your main teachers when you started studying economics? Straffa?
There was a very special person, David Chamberlain, who had been professor in Oxford, and a man of many eccentricities, and one of them was that he got fed up with being professor in Oxford, and Cambridge managed to invent a readership for him. Unusual to have a readership that brings somebody in. And he did that. He once told me that trouble with Oxford was you couldn't, at high table you couldn't talk about science fiction and you couldn't talk about computing. What else is there to talk about?
Why not? I mean, I always thought you couldn't talk about religion, sex and politics, but I didn't know about science fiction.
Oh, this was the incapacity of his interlocutors.
Oh, I see. They were incapable.
Not any prohibition.
Oh, I see.
But certainly in Nuffield there was no prohibition about talking politics, for example.
Yeah.
And Nuffield in Oxford was where he was. Anyway, he arrived back that very year that I was starting economics. They assigned Dick Stone to be my supervisor. And they got a Nobel Prize a bit later on, so that's clearly some effect there. That was very nice. But Dick arranged that David would actually teach me economics. So David arranged that I would come along once a week with the supervisions. Right. That was fine. I wouldn't have said that he was a notably good teacher, except that I do know quite a number of other people who found him very valuable, valuable supervisor. That first meeting, he said he'd just been reading the general theory, so he'd like me to go away and read the general theory and write something about it for next week. I'm trying to grapple with Keynes at that stage. It's not that easy. I tended to go on a bit that way, throw things at it, which I was puzzled to do, but I learned a lot from that. He had been, I think, a choral scholar of Keynes.
Chamberlain.
Yes. And been more than on the edge of the Keynes group.
So were the other King's economists like Kaldor and Kahn and so on active at that time, or were they a bit later?
I mean, when David Chamberlain was in King's? Oh yes, they were very active. I don't think he was actually a member of that sounding board group that read the drafts of the general theory and reported comments back to Keynes. But might have been along to some of it. But he was much more mathematical than the others. He was a mathematical economist, and a statistical economist, and a very good one.
Did you, I'm not sure of Keynes's dates, but did you overlap with him at all?
No. He died even before I got to Cambridge. I think early 50s he died.
And his shadow was still there.
Oh, the shadow has been over Cambridge economics for a very long time. I don't think it is now. Bob Rotham might have had a different view. But it was refracted. We don't refract shadows, but you know what I mean. But anyway, it shouldn't be the shadow of Keynes, it should be the light of Keynes. So it was refracted through a number of powerful personalities who, I think in many ways, took it in a different way from what I imagine Keynes.
Did you know Luigi Passinetti
Yes.
at all? He was a
Oh yes, he was already, he would have been something like a research fellow when I started economics, and was a lecturer by the time I came back from India to lectureship.
And you
Several
came back
years
from-
older, pretty much contemporary with Mortis Sam. It was a couple of years.
He was here when I
Before
first
me.
came. Yes. When you came back from India,
Yeah, well, after I finished my PhD work,
well, tell me about the PhD first. What was the subject of it?
well, having explained how I was abandoning mathematics and
Yes.
going into economics in
Yeah.
order to understand economics and do something about poverty,
Yeah.
I got interested in planning because Dick Stone had a group who were studying planning in a way. That's to say, they were devising a model of the British economy which could do what they called indicative planning, meaning it would show the way the economy might well go. It wouldn't necessarily mean that anyone gave commands to say that that's how it would go, but it would be indicative. However, that meant I naturally got interested in these decision problems of what should a government do, what should a country do. And Dick Stone encouraged me to take an interest in Frank Ramsey's famous problem of how much you should save. He wrote this brilliant paper on spare a few days in economics, where he offered an answer to that question. And I thought that was quite an interesting question, and puzzled over it for a time. And then I thought, well, one thing that's odd about it is that it takes no kind of uncertainty, and non-economists tend to think that the obvious thing about economies is that they're very uncertain, and all kinds of things keep happening, and you can't forecast them. So, what about that? So I took that problem up, and that's what my PhD thesis was about. It was about how you could work out decisions on a question like how much an economy should save, and how that decision would be influenced by taking account of uncertainty. Curiously enough, this was a subject that it turned out quite a number of American economists had begun to think about as well. A number of papers happened simultaneously, and I never, well, not until much later did I publish a paper on the subject.
Why do you think there was this concurrent, it almost sounds like a paradigm change, which was...
Yeah. Yes, it did turn out to be. It's now a major part of Ramsey saving is a key part of the economics education of the young. It certainly wasn't anywhere in the world in the 60s. But, it seems particularly surprising because American economists were not interested in planning.
But they weren't
And
interested
this
in
seems to be
uncertainty.
very much a planning kind of question. If you think of a government as taking decisions about how much saving should happen in the economy, which they can control rather imperfectly, the interest rate and so on.
Were you focusing this on India in the PhD, or was that later after you'd finished?
Oh, I continued a serious interest in development throughout that time. I was reading a lot of the books on development. But nevertheless, I didn't make any serious connection. It's just that I was delighted to get the chance to go to India.
Was this after the PhD? Or?
Yes. Yes. It's when I'd finished the PhD work. I actually didn't write the thesis until I came back from India and spent the summer in Plockton in Scotland, typing away on a little typewriter. Created the thesis, but it was worked out before I left. However, in India, I didn't continue with that particularly, and indeed in that time I pretty much decided that taking a very command planning view was quite the wrong way to be running an economy.
Was this in reaction to this was the time that the Indian government were doing 5-year plans and so on?
Yes, that's right.
So in reaction to that, you were...
Well, in reaction to the bad results of them trying to do it. That there are quite a number of examples which major economists have already drawn attention to.
Were you
taking
aware...
quite the wrong decisions.
What date was this?
I was there 62, 63.
Were you already aware of the disaster? Well, it was just before the Great Leap Forward, but I mean, were you aware of... Well, it was actually, it was just after.
China.
Were you aware of at all of the disasters of planning in China?
No. No, on the contrary. I think perhaps I probably heard Joan Robinson talk about China too much, and she believed that it was going great. It was more or less the perfect economy.
Was that, I mean, that's always been a puzzle to me and many other people, but both she and Needham went there, presumably, and saw something. Did they just deceive themselves, as many people did in Stalin's Russia, or did they want to believe this, or did they not want to betray their friends in China, or why did they go on like this?
Well, I'm sure that John Robinson at least really believed that the Chinese economy was working pretty well. During that time I was in India, she passed through. The daughter was living in India at the time. And, I remember us going around some fields in a village in India, and she was talking about how very well organized the Chinese were, very efficient. And you told them to do something, they did it. As compared to these Indians who were feckless and was going nowhere. It's fair enough about India, a lot of fecklessness. But in India I certainly experienced the business being taken to some villages which were showpieces. However, it being India, the next day I'd be taken to a village that was the complete opposite. Because there's a wonderful honesty about India, which shows up in things like the poverty data, something like that. They don't seem to hide anything. With one exception, we managed to take a really nice big map of us to India. But this was the year of the India-China War. China invaded. It turned out China had built a road in what India thought was their territory. And it took a while before they noticed.
63.
The war. 63. Probably started at the end of 62. And unfortunately, that took a lot of the attention of India during that time. I think I could have learned more if I hadn't got worked up about the war and then thinking so much about the economy.
So when you came back, by now were you a fellow at Trinity, or were you a research fellow? Or?
Yeah, they had one of those things. I don't think they could quite happen now. But the year before I went away, that's my third year as an economics student, I got lured over to Oxford, and Nuffield College in Oxford offered me a research fellowship, which I would have come back to after the year in India. And within a week, Trinity trumped it by offering me the teaching fellowship that was vacated because Amartya Sen was going to India and to the Delhi school a year later. So I grabbed that. A little bit wondered. I had put in for a research fellowship at the end of my second year, but with a thesis, which in retrospect was really not something I should have been trying to get a research fellowship in. Although I was probably the proximate case of that in the election. And of course I had intended to put in a thesis that year. And I suppose probably I would have accepted nothing instead. That might not have been so bad. I think the advantage of having a good many years just to do research, that would have been pretty good. And unfortunately I didn't do that.
You came back to teaching. To ask you about teaching. You came back to a teaching fellowship. I presume you meant lecturing and supervising. Do you like those two activities?
I think I like lecturing better than supervising. No, not entirely sure. It depends who I'm supervising. Because when it comes to, because what I really enjoy is when somebody with a bit of originality, creativity, or whatever. Of course, the thing that supervisions can do that other kinds of education can't is actually to draw that out of people. For example, by asking them rather difficult questions. I believe in not telling them too much about what they ought to go and read, things like that. Lots of things which are not always very popular with students. Although I was fortunate enough to, I only did supervision for 5 years of undergraduates. So that was in a period when nobody was going to complain about the way you didn't give absolutely standard reading lists. Complain. Carry on. And I think the results of my students were okay, so it must have been not too bad. And lecture, I enjoy the business of working out a subject, putting it together, and expanding. And yet I've never felt I could actually write a textbook, despite having reams of notes and things like that. But that side of things I do enjoy. And I might have been one of the earlier ones to like to provide not particularly full notes, but notes to circulate to people in class, rather than have them sit and scribble their attempt at writing down what you said. So there's more of a chance that they'd go left with what you really wanted them to hear, rather than what they do hear. Usually not the same. Since I was mainly doing mathematical things, that's a particular advantage there. Things get written down. That was not something that the maths lecturers that I'd had in Cambridge did in these days. You had to get it all down on paper yourself. So that was a little bit of a local innovation, I think. But I also lectured on development. And that was where I felt there was more scope for creativity, trying to think out what development economics was. I think I only did it 2 years. Now by asking me the question, you remind me of this interesting experience. Because I must have made most of it up out of my head and my recollection of what I'd read a year or two earlier, rather than by detailed reading at the time. Certainly we didn't have a textbook before, anything like that. So my notes, which I was typing up all the time, actually got into the Marshall Library now, because I must go and see if it's still there. I'd be curious to know what I wrote it at the time. But I was very delighted when some years later Mr. X reported to me that Mr. Y had just said that he'd been to the best possible course in development economics just before he went out to developing countries, and he felt well prepared.
That's excellent. You mentioned development economics, and you mentioned earlier Amartya Sen, and also we have here Parvati Gupta and others. I wondered whether you'd like to say anything about either of those two famous Indian economists, and how they must be friends of yours. And
Yes. Amartya became a friend, and that was very valuable. Indeed, it was Amartya who introduced me into the apostles. And I learned a lot from him, particularly from reading first his thesis and then his books. I worked through his book on social choice, sent him notes on it. So I read a lot of interesting things. I think my first publication might have been a review of the book that contained Amartya's PhD thesis, essentially, which was published in India. I looked at that for years, but somehow that rather cemented our friendship. His range is great. I'm not entirely sure that social choice is a good topic to spend a lot of effort on, but he has certainly done many good things with it. In some ways, some of the most intellectually admirable things in economics have been in social choice. So I keep coming back to that a bit, enjoying it. But the closest I've got to it was a paper, a chapter on utilitarianism from the point of view of an economist, in a book that Mirrlees and Martin edited. Otherwise, I was a bit more. So that was very nice. I learned a lot from that. And Partha was my student. I introduced him to economics. Gave him lots of supervisions. And so I introduced him. First, we have this diploma course, which is the 1 year learning economics. And then I brought him into that same kind of problem that I'd been doing my thesis on, optimal saving, but not with uncertainty, it was different aspects, and I suggested optimal population as well, which James Mean had done. Very, very good things on. I don't know if that's how Partha managed to meet his wife, who's one of James's daughters. It might have made contact that way. There can be a real. Actually, I don't think that's quite right. I think they were just both, like you'd say, very beautiful people who noticed one another wherever they were. It might have been in London.
Talking of wives, when did you first marry? Was this
1961.
61? So before you went to India.
Yes. That's right.
Did your wife?
It was just immediately after. My wife had been working for a year. She graduated from Hamilton as a teacher, commuting. I persuaded her to marry me.
Did she go to India with you?
Yes, she did. Certainly that was harder for her than for me. She was often the case. People go to particularly strange lands. We laughed over the document that we got given in America. We went to India via America. because it was an MIT project. And we got handed a piece of paper about culture shock to prepare us for India. And I think we particularly liked the instructions, were amused by the instruction that if bitten by a dog, keep it there until the police arrive so that it can be tested for rabies. So, but when it came to the point, yes, there was, I don't think culture shock is the right sort of description for what it's like to be in a strange country where things are all very different and not to have an occupation. Because of course the people running the house, cooking for us, all that. Oh, there's plenty to see. And after the first 6 months, it was okay. We had that was very important to us.
Did you have children by your first marriage?
Oh yes, that's my children by my first marriage.
How many?
Because it went on two girls who have each bred 2 children. So
You've got grandchildren?
we're proceeding in the appropriate steady state manner. 2 children at each stage.
Was there anything else you want to say about your first wife, or she died, I gather?
Yes, she did. Yes, that was very sad. Early on, cancer, and too many people have that experience, of course. And the way breast cancer goes, it tends to take on. It goes on for 5 years. In that case, goes away, comes back. It's never quite well. It was very sad. We got on very well together, so I was very sad about that. In a way, it's just sentimental, but it would have been awfully nice if she had known that I got the prize. Been able to be there when it happened. But at least the girls were. And
when did she die? You got your prize in '96, was that?
yes, 93.
93. So you didn't know that you'd been nominated or anything like that?
Well, I didn't know anyway. It came out of the blue.
And then just to round that off, then you remarried Pat later on, yes. I was just going to, taking you back to your teaching, just make a very big leap. You're now the head of a college in Hong Kong, or university, I'm not sure whether it's just a college or university. College. I wondered whether you consciously try and take anything you learnt about how to educate university students from your own experience here. Does any of it fit with running a university?
When Larry Lau was the Vice Chancellor of the university, asked me to take this on. By the way, the college will not exist until the 1st of August. That's getting close. It won't take its first students until
Oh, I see. It hasn't
until
started yet.
September next year, not this year. So this is to do with bureaucratic delays and approving grant funding from government and all that boring stuff. But for me, actually, quite important because in some ways I feel it's waiting too long. It's not that I feel old. I don't feel any older than I was 50 years ago, but I'm sure it's not quite so easy to relate to the students. Heads of college in Cambridge are not necessarily very much in contact with students. Certainly in the old days, they might not be at all. Whereas I immediately thought, well, what can we do here? The suggestion Larry had made was that we would be looking for a college that was as much like an Oxford or Cambridge college as possible. He'd spent a year as a visiting fellow at Churchill and been rather impressed. But as much like a Cambridge college as possible, still quite a long way from being like a Cambridge college, because we don't have any teaching fellows. Well, we will expect the fellows to do some teaching, and actually we're moving a little bit towards it, but the amount of teaching that we get to do as a college is quite little. And particularly against the Hong Kong background, where the examination questions tend to be pretty routine and rote-like. And the students seem to want to know exactly what's expected of them, and then get on into being accountants. Well, it shouldn't be rude about accountants because they get a hard time. I immediately thought what I particularly valued about my Cambridge education, and also about what I thought I could achieve with graduate students, particularly in Oxford, and also in my years in Cambridge, was somehow drawing out of people the originality that so many of them seem to have already. At the college level, that obviously means things like getting people into the right sphere, right subject, as well, that you can't take it for granted that you're going to be economists or whatever. So I'm intrigued about just how much we can do in order to achieve this. And at the moment I'm slightly fearful that maybe some conflict between what I'd like to do as a college and what the university thinks colleges should do. Because they're increasingly saying that they want the college teaching to be what they call personal development. I'm not very
What does
sympathetic.
personal development mean, sort of?
Well, I assume that the difference between personal and academic development, that is the distinction drawn. Not very clear what it means, except that one seems to be thinking about me and the other one seems to be thinking about everybody else, or the mechanisms of the world. And I'd rather that people spend most of their time thinking about the things of the world at large. But I don't mean that it isn't important to reflect on what you think the world is about and you're about within it. I'm sure that it's important that we help, but it almost sounds like pastoral rather than educational, if you can draw that distinction. Well, I shall have maybe a little bit of a task to make sure we lean well into the creativity and independence and originality side. We expect to get a lot of people from mainland China. Probably 30 to 40% of the student body in the college.
That was actually going to lead me into a very general question about what you're feeling about the year. I know you're an expert on probability and likelihoods and so on, so one can't predict. But are you, on the whole, optimistic about the next 10 years in China, or mainland China, that is, or worried, or?
No, I'm not worried. I'm not pessimistic, although we know that all kinds of things can happen. There are a variety of different kinds of developments which could be. One could have quite strong preferences. Certainly I would like to see a move towards what I would think of as real democracy. It's clearly quite a way to go. Of course it's far from hopeless. There are a lot of quite independent lawyers and there's a great range of opinion. Certainly there is no sense when I'm in China of serious restraint in conversation. So one can see already that it would be wrong to say that there isn't an openness in the society already. And we're not talking of a thoroughly authoritarian regime. And of course it's very interesting the way it's gone that way. got something to do with economic freedoms, but it isn't only that. For an economist, it's particularly interesting when you see there are universities where there are maybe essentially two departments of economics or more, one of which would be quite Marxist, and the other is what gets called Western economics. Of course, the fact that they're both there is clear evidence of that openness and reality in the society, which people outside don't seem entirely aware of. But then, of course, one's very disturbed about the problems with taking over property, whatever it might be. And then you reflect that this is not unheard of in Britain or America. So a lot of the things that are referred to as problems are actually quite similar to things that happen in the West. Xinjiang recently, clear example of that. What we've got is something analogous to the riots in Los Angeles or the troubles in Northern Ireland, big differences as well. But all of this is supposed to say it's come a long way, and I think there will be grounds for general political optimism. Although I think I will be a bit surprised when there is anything, if there is anything analogous to the Soviet Union breakdown, because they do seem to have a rather well-organized system. And the Communist Party is exceptionally well organized. But with one proviso, certainly the Chinese government would say there's a lot of corruption. You don't expect corruption and good organisation to go together. So I dare say that more serious problems in some areas than in others. And with that, you never quite know which way to go.
Well, that last comment takes us back to your work and your attempts to try and work out probable outcomes and so on. And I, as I mentioned to you earlier, one of the joys of these interviews is that I try and get people to explain to a general audience their work, and particularly their central work, and that might be the work that led to your Nobel Prize. So for an innocent like myself and the rest of us who are watching this, can you tell me something about this background and the problem you were trying to solve with your work in Oxford on these models, which led to your Nobel Prize?
I got there by thinking about taxation, and indeed it's quite a classic setup in economics to acknowledge that in some way there's an incentive problem. Suppose that you think it really would be a good idea pretty much to equalize incomes amongst people, and that you could do that by levying taxes at a very high rate. And you could take it all away from anyone who happens to make a bit more than the average. It's obvious to essentially everybody that this isn't likely to work very well. That's to say that the sheer threat of doing that will create a pretty unsatisfactory economy. So there's no great contribution in pointing that out. But I think it is important to find a rigorous formulation of that. But part of what I was engaged in, this is work with Peter Diamond at MIT, was to give a fully rigorous account of the workings of an economy, where you pay attention to this problem of incentives. The question is, what is the problem of incentives? And I can see great economists like Paul Samuelson clearly understand what that is in some of the writings. And it did seem to me that most people didn't quite understand what it was. And here's another of those areas where a number of us probably got onto the point simultaneously of saying that another way of looking at this is it's all about the information that people have about other people. And recognizing that a lot of our economic relations with other people are not like buying and selling in the local market or a shop, something like that, but are more like writing a contract with them. I'm going to want to take this up in relation to the recent financial and global crisis, because I think one of the things that we should have learned from all of this might have prevented it. And that's very interesting to reflect about. But once you say the limitations about the information that people have about one another, this means that when you write a contract, for example, to a contract that's going to get somebody to deliver something to you in a couple of years' time, and maybe you pay him now for it. It's not just that you're not quite sure whether you can trust him to do it. You can't be sure that he's going to be able to do it. An absolutely key example of this is the relationship between the government and the taxpayer. The government would like to levy a particular tax on somebody. The ideal tax is one where you tax people on the basis of their abilities, their learning abilities. It wouldn't be an entirely bad idea to have tax rates that are based on examination results, for example. But, of course, then you straight away run into the problem that if you do try to institute the idea of exams based on exam results, well, then people will start getting very poor exam results. So it's just the same sort of thing as the very form of the relationship, in this case the contract, social contract between the government and individuals that's described by the tax system. That this creates incentive problems. And in deciding what the tax system should be, we have to choose that subject to the constraint that you have limited information about people's actual abilities. All you know about them is what they'll do. You don't know what they can do. Once you see this as being a central kind of economic relationship, you have to realize that it's not like buying and selling. So there's a whole area of economic activity which is missed from the standard basic model. So I wrote down a particular model of this kind, which I called an optimal income tax problem. It was intended to be a good description, as simple as possible, of an economy in which incentive problems matter. Of course it was mathematical, because that's the way I do things. And then I found that there was a really difficult problem of even finding equations that would describe the optimum. It was a problem I cracked, and that's what I'm really pleased about in life. That I found the answer to a partly conceptual, partly mathematical problem. I say partly conceptual because it's a matter of expressing these general ideas in form you can work with in mathematics.
Do you remember the moment when you I mean, was it one of those eureka things, or was it over a period of time?
No, it must have been a eureka moment, and oddly enough, I don't quite. I can't locate it in time. I think it must have been just close to the end of my time in Cambridge.
You don't remember, like Macfarlane, the exact moment you stepped onto a bus and the idea came into your head or anything like that? Or that you were listening to Handel or something like that, romantic like
That would be good, wouldn't it? Memory is not my strong point, and in this case, sadly, that would have been a really good one. But let me go on and
Yes.
take this other example, because just to, it's perhaps obvious that in some sense it's important because you're dealing with tax is a big thing. But here's another big thing, which is we suffer this big financial crisis. And in my view, one of the major reasons why we suffer this crisis is because there was a market for particular kinds of what we call securities. That's to say, people were buying and selling these famous CDOs, which are bundled mortgages, just as though they were oranges and apples. So a market was established for them, it's priced, and there you are. That meant that you didn't have a contractual relationship. It meant that nobody had taken the choice of creating the right kinds of incentives for the lenders, for the bankers. So as a result, the banks were lending too much, and they were lending carelessly. It didn't matter to them whether they lent to somebody who was going to pay back or not, because the thing had been sold on. Now, so 20 years, 30 years earlier, economists, of whom I was one, had developed the theory of these kinds of things and had been quite clear that you shouldn't have a market for securities of that kind. I suppose the economists who'd worked that out didn't know what kinds of securities were being traded. It wasn't their sort of world. Maybe they were the kind of, like me, the sort of economist who isn't very much interested in self-investment and things, keeps the money in the savings account and doesn't want to be bothered with all of that. So they didn't know about what was going on in the financial world. But there were some very good theories. I remember a paper which showed that you did not get the right results. A paper by somebody else in the economy.
Is this what you call moral hazard?
Yes, exactly that.
Was this a phrase you were using at that time, or was it's come out?
It was a phrase I was using, but it was already in existence in the insurance industry. The insurance industry has been well aware of moral hazard for a while, but they don't seem to have been very good at understanding.
Can you just sort of flesh it out a little bit more? So I think I know what it means, but again, it's really what you've been talking about, is that you can take decisions without any hazard to yourself, really. I mean,
yeah, that's the extreme case. That's right. Moral hazard is when there are things you do or might do which cannot be observed, and where people cannot deduce what you did either, because the results of what you do were pretty uncertain. You might have some unobservable action, like there's nobody in the room when you poke the fire, but smoke comes out the chimney, people can see that, so they know you poked the fire. But we're talking of the kinds of things where it might go that way, it might go another way. You don't know which kind of people the bank has decided to lend a lot of money to. And you certainly don't know how carefully the lender considered the risks that were involved and what kind of information he got. So the moral hazard there, it's a curious term. We've got to live with it now since it's well established. The trouble is it's a term that doesn't help people to focus in and see just what it is that's going wrong. We need a term that describes the behaviour. And the problem is when you have behaviour that you can only imperfectly deduce from the outcomes. And so therefore you have to write a suitable contract in those outcomes. create the right kinds of incentives
Mm.
to behave appropriately. Now, behaving appropriately isn't necessarily what you would do if you could be authoritative and tell somebody what to do.
Mm.
You have to be moderate in the use of incentives.
Mm.
But generally speaking, you get the right incentives if people have to bear some of the risk of their actions themselves. And if you go to complete insurance, which is what effectively happened in the financial system, then you get bad results.
Do you think that the actions that have been taken since and are being taken will overcome this problem, or?
Well, I haven't been looking at things in sufficient detail, but I've just looked at the newspapers and what the central bankers are reported as saying, and it doesn't seem to me that they're showing the right kind of understanding. They don't seem to have said that this is how we are going to ensure that the world has a problem to solve.
Mm.
Indeed, they talk as the banks should be pretty much left to carry on as they were, with people just observing more carefully. And what they don't understand is observing more carefully is not the answer.
Mm.
You have to pay attention to the incentives that the banks have to do their business, just as you have to pay, as the bank should be paying attention to the incentives that the borrower has to pay back. But the really important thing here is on all these silly derivatives that have been created, a great financial reward to the individuals who create them, which have a negative social value.
I don't know the work of one of my former students who allegedly, through anthropological analysis, predicted all this a couple of years before it happened, and she's a financial journalist for Financial Times, Gillian Tett, and she's written a book, and she's always on the television at the moment. Yeah, have you heard about this work by Gillian? Perhaps you doesn't.
No, I should have, clearly.
No, she's always up on the air, but she did write about it and say what's going to happen, and of course people say, oh, an anthropologist, what do they know? And turned out it was a tribal problem, and basically, being an anthropologist, she came into an alien tribe, and she didn't look at them as from the financial point of view. She looked at the social relations between them and the sort of things you were talking about, the contracts and the personal networks and so on, and allegedly saw that this was all about to crash down. But now, of course, you can say I saw it coming, but
No, yeah, quite right. And indeed, lots of people should have seen it. It had happened before. Just not in quite such a large scale. But I assume she knew some of the facts that said the scale would be even larger than with the Savings and Loan Association problem or long-term capital management.
Well, we've very kindly talked at some length about all sorts of things, but I know I've missed the whole of your time at Oxford. You went there for 20 years, and then you come back and you had some years here. This tends to happen, that one misses great chunks of people's lives in a short interview. But is there anything you would have really liked me to have asked you or talked about that I've missed, apart from large chunks of your life? Anything to do with your theories or current work or future work?
Something I value in what I've done was the students who passed through my administrations. I essentially think of graduate students, although some undergraduate students who did.
You supervise quite a lot of PhD students, have you?
Yes. Yeah. I've had a degree of contact with a very large number, we're probably on to 3 digits. But those who actually got PhDs, I've certainly long lost count. And a lot of them have been very good. Like there were 3 of my students were professors in Cambridge, in the economics faculty, and one in the CS. Two of them had been undergraduates, Parth at Scripta and David Newbury. Parth had also been a graduate student of division, and Chris Harris, who's colleague of yours from King's. I'm not saying that I should give a vast amount of credit for this, because there's an extern and there's a lot of major American economists that you don't necessarily know the names of. No Nobel Prize winners yet. But that's not one of the most important things. I think the point is that they've done great research and sometimes perform very well in other spheres. And it's given me so that gives me a lot of vicarious pleasure. And I wonder what it is that means somehow or other one has a stream of very able people. I can think of a number of other economists who've also had this very nice experience. I can think of a very large number of other equally good economists who seem to have had very few claim notable brood. So there we are. As I say, I can't claim any great marginal product in this, but
I'm sure it's more than a coincidence.
Well, it was a lot of fun.
A lot of fun. Well, that's probably a very nice point to end. A fortunate and fun life. So thank you very much indeed for
Thank you.
that.